The child no one claimed returned, holding a stranger's hand. The night the child came back, the air in Hollow Creek grew still, so still that even the crickets stopped singing. It had been 3 years since the boy disappeared. He was last seen outside the old community center, his small hands clutching a balloon from the fair. Nobody ever found a trace of him. No footprints, no torn clothing, not even a cry heard in the night. The town searched for weeks, but gradually, as the seasons turned, people began to speak of him less and less. His name was buried in whispers, until he became just another cautionary tale told to children who stayed out too late. But on his birthday, as the clock struck midnight, he returned. He walked into town barefoot, his little feet pale against the cracked asphalt. He wore the same striped shirt he had vanished in, though it was unstained, as if he had never spent a day gone. In his free hand, he held tightly onto something else. No, someone else. The townsfolk who saw him from their windows swore their blood ran cold. The boy's face was the same, yet not the same. His eyes, once wide and innocent, had a hollow gleam that reflected the moonlight unnaturally. And the figure whose hand he held, a tall, gaunt shadow of a man, was impossible to describe. Some claimed he wore a suit that shimmered as though stitched from smoke. Others said they couldn't make out his face at all, only a suggestion of one, blurred as if it refused to be seen. The boy did not knock on any doors. He did not cry for his mother. He simply walked with the figure, straight through the town square, as though returning home. When the sheriff finally mustered the courage to approach, he called the boy's name. But the boy did not respond. He only turned his head slowly, and that was when they saw it. His lips stretched into a smile too wide, too forced, as though it had been placed on his face like a mask. The sheriff swore his voice cracked when he asked, "Son, who's with you?" The boy tilted his head and spoke for the first time in 3 years. His voice was steady, flat, not the trembling tone of a frightened child but something rehearsed, something wrong. "He's the one who kept me safe," the boy said. "And now he's here for the rest of you." The crowd that had gathered went silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle of feet. Only the sound of the wind creaking through the empty flagpole above the courthouse. Then the shadow figure squeezed the boy's hand tighter. And though no sound came from the figure's mouth, every person there swore they heard it. Deep inside their heads, a voice like cold stone dragged across metal. "Tonight, he is mine. Tomorrow, another." The boy did not resist. He looked almost proud. By morning, the child was gone again. His house, where his grieving parents once lived, stood abandoned. The family had left town years ago, unable to face the silence of his absence. But on the porch, left neatly on the wooden steps, was a single balloon. Red. Freshly tied. And on its surface, written in a child's messy scrawl, were the words, "He chose me first. Who's next?" The town of Hollow Creek has never slept peacefully since. The town had never been so quiet. Every door was locked, every curtain drawn, yet eyes watched from between slits of fabric, too terrified to blink. The child, small, pale, and eerily calm, stood in the middle of the street. And beside him, the stranger lingered. No one could describe the figure in detail. Some swore it was tall, others said it bent low, stooping like it was carrying something too heavy. Its face was never seen, only a blur, like fog refusing to clear. But one thing was certain, it was holding the child's hand, and the child seemed content. By morning, the whispers spread. Parents came forward, trembling, each one admitting they recognized the boy. He looked like theirs. He had their son's nose, their daughter's hair, their missing child's crooked smile. Yet when each reached out, desperate to claim him, the boy would shake his head. "You're not mine," he would whisper. His voice was flat, his tone certain, and the stranger's grip on his hand would tighten. The sheriff tried to intervene. He ordered the boy into the station, demanded answers, tried to pry him away from the figure at his side. But the stranger never moved, never fought, never resisted. The boy simply looked at the sheriff with dark, hollow eyes and asked, Why do you lie?" That night, the first parent went missing. A mother who had sworn the boy was her lost child never came home. Her door was left wide open. Her bed was untouched. The only thing left was a trail of small footprints leading back to the boy and the stranger. And still, no one dared claim him again. But children aren't good at keeping secrets. At school, one boy whispered to another that he saw the pale child waiting at the edge of the playground. That he had smiled, lifted his hand, and pointed at him. Hours later, that boy never made it home. His parents found his backpack on the swings. By now, the town knew the truth. Whoever the child pointed at, whoever dared to believe he belonged to them, was marked. And the stranger would take them, one by one, into the dark. The boy no longer waited in the street. He began appearing where he wasn't supposed to, at the edge of driveways, in the reflections of shop windows, at the very back of church pews during Sunday Mass. Always with the stranger at his side. At first, people tried not to look. But you couldn't ignore him. Even if you turned your face away, the weight of his stare pressed against the back of your skull until you swore his shadow stretched across your floorboards. One night, the mayor called a town meeting. They gathered in the old hall, the air thick with fear and whispers. Someone demanded they drive the child and his companion out. Someone else said they should burn them where they stood. But when the doors opened, he was already there. The pale boy stood in the doorway, clutching the stranger's hand. His eyes scanned the crowd like he was searching for someone. The whispers died. The mayor froze mid-sentence. No one breathed. Then, the boy smiled. It wasn't the smile of a child. It was too wide, too knowing. He lifted his free hand and pointed. At the mayor. The hall erupted in screams. The townsfolk surged forward, trying to stop it, but it was useless. The stranger didn't move. Didn't need to. The mayor dropped where he stood, gasping for air, clawing at his throat like invisible hands were crushing it. By the time anyone reached him, his eyes had already gone glassy. The boy turned to leave. And the stranger, silent, faceless, followed him out into the night. That was when people began to understand. The boy wasn't choosing who belonged to him. He was choosing who belonged to the stranger. Children stopped playing outside. Families locked themselves in basements. But still, the boy came. In windows. In dreams. In the places you thought were safe. And always, he pointed. Soon, the townspeople realized something worse. The more the boy pointed, the less they remembered the victims at all. Names slipped away. Faces faded. Entire families began to vanish not just from life, but from memory. It was as if those taken had never existed. And the boy. He never looked lonely anymore. By the end of that week, the town was a hollow shell of itself. Whole streets were abandoned, curtains drawn, windows nailed shut. But no matter how many locks were fastened, no matter how tightly they pressed their palms over their eyes, the boy still found a way in. Sometimes he stood at the foot of a bed, silent, holding the stranger's hand. Sometimes he pressed his pale face against the glass until the pain fogged with his breath. And sometimes, worst of all, you would hear his small sing-song voice drifting through your house, though his lips never moved. "I've found you." It was never a question. The few who dared to flee the town never made it far. Their cars would be found abandoned by the roadside, doors flung open, engines still humming. No footprints led away, only the faint drag marks of something heavy being pulled across the dirt. The priest, desperate, tried to bless the church and keep the boy out. On Sunday, the pews filled again with trembling souls, everyone clutching candles like lifelines. They prayed louder than they had in years, voices cracking as if begging heaven itself to listen. But when the final amen echoed, the doors groaned open. The boy stood there once more, the stranger looming behind him. Every candle sputtered and died at once, plunging the hall into darkness. When light returned, the priest was gone. His robes lay neatly folded in the aisle, as though his body had simply unraveled. That night, the bells of the church tolled by themselves. And the boy's laughter carried across the rooftops, a thin, echoing sound that didn't belong to a child at all. The survivors began to whisper a new fear. The stranger wasn't merely taking lives. He was taking place. Every soul erased made room for something else. Something that walked behind the boy, waiting to step through the cracks left behind. And the boy was no longer pointing at random. He was pointing at families. At children. At anyone who tried to remember too loudly. The boy had returned holding a stranger's hand. But now, the town feared that soon, they would all be holding his. By the last night, the town was no longer a town at all. Doors hung from hinges. Lamps flickered without oil. The streets were so silent it felt as if the earth itself had stopped breathing. And yet, in the square, the boy stood smiling. He looked no older than 7, though centuries seemed to rest in his eyes. His hand clutched the stranger's, whose form was still blurred, like a shadow refusing to sharpen. One by one, the last survivors gathered, as if compelled. No one admitted they walked there willingly, but their feet dragged them forward, against their will, until they circled the child. The boy raised his other hand, finger outstretched, pointing at the crowd. But this time, he didn't choose. The stranger did. The shadow leaned forward, its shape unraveling into something that had never been human. Its face was not a face but a gaping hollow, stitched with countless voices, screaming, laughing, whispering all at once. The sound rolled through the air like a storm of broken memories. The boy spoke, though his lips never moved. He is not a stranger anymore. You know him. You all do. You tried to forget. But forgetting was the invitation. And suddenly, every survivor remembered at once. The missing faces. The children who had been erased. The families unspoken. The gaps in memory that no prayer or picture could fill. The stranger was not new. He had always been here, fed by silence, nourished by what they refused to claim. Every unspoken name, every denied memory had carved him deeper into existence. The boy's smile widened as he let go of the stranger's hand. The hollow figure stepped forward, alone now, and reached into the crowd. It touched a woman's chest, and she vanished without sound, her body collapsing into a faint smear of ash. Another followed, then another, until panic shattered the circle. But it was useless. Running only drew his gaze. Hiding only made him linger longer. By dawn, the square was empty. No boy. No stranger. No townsfolk. Only a row of small, neat handprints pressed into the dirt, leading out into the fields, toward the horizon. And the story ends with one truth whispered like a curse. The child no one claimed will always return. And he will never walk alone.